Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Beyond Hearing podcast. I'm your host, Leof Dalton. If you're new around here, consider following the show or subscribing if you're on YouTube. If you like the show, give us a review, rating, comment, and always sharing is one of the best ways to help support us, get the word out, and all of that, of course, would be so much appreciated. We have a great guest on today. We're going to talk about a cool topic, something we didn't necessarily dive into too deep yet. So I'm really looking forward to kind of introducing some of these topics we're discussing today. These are topics that I've studied extensively, kind of more in the personal life. Um, and so I'm really excited to introduce them to the podcast and kind of dig into them a little bit more because they're certainly very important, especially in this day and age. So we have great guests. We have Mr. Max Hillebrand today. Max, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Lee, for the invitation. I'm looking forward to join the podcast and talk about this very exciting topic, because praxeology
Amazing.
is probably something that most nobody has ever heard before. Um, but it really is a topic that is worth digging into. It's not just a fascinating way of thought, but also a pretty interesting, meaningful way of life that has emerged. A lot of cool hacks to yeah live live a good life basically. So praxeology is a really cool and applicable subject for everyone.
Agreed. Yeah, amazing. So before we get into praxeology, I want to ask you our introductory question. It's sort of an interesting question. I'm looking forward to hear your answer. It's to kind of get a definition of health. What is health? What does health mean to you? What does it look like? How does it manifest? You could take it any direction you like. Just love to hear your thoughts on this.
That's an interesting question, and I'd say that health is something akin to a organism's ability to actually achieve what he sets out to achieve, without biological hindrance, right? By being kind of in tune with his physical body, such that he can do the things that his mind would like to see done. um, and I guess that's uh, when you're in physical pain, that kind of rules out all of your plans. If you're sick, you don't do the things that you would like to do. You just kind of have to hang out in bed and try to recover. So yeah, I would guess health and manifestation of will are quite closely correlated.
Yeah, amazing, beautiful answer. I love that. Yeah, that's kind of I think one of the best ways to approach that definition too, right? Because it depends on the individual, it depends on what your goals are. It's kind of um, gives a really good like general overview of what health is, right? Because it looks different for everybody, right? It looks different based on your ability and your circumstances and your goals. So yeah, great answer. I love that. So I'm sure we could probably tie that into praxeology a little bit, but I'd love to just hear sort of an overview of what is this praxeology? What is the praxeological method? Why is it useful? Why should we even care about it? I'll give you the floor and we'll go from there.
I guess let's start with the etymology, right? What does the word mean? Where does it come from? And it's Greek, basically meaning the logic of human action. And so this is a science which looks into the consequences of human action, right? And this goes back to like the early 1900s, where people were thinking quite deeply about a lot of things, obviously, and including economics, and there was a big dispute in how should we think about and analyze the economic affairs, right? To do business and to be employed, etc. What is money? What is interest and debt and equity and such like. Um, all of these questions kind of need to be answered, and praxeology lays out a very interesting approach that's quite foundationally different to all the, let's say, legacy economic schools of thought that you've most likely heard about in school or in college. Um, and that is ultimately that we shall start by analyzing the human affair based on axioms that we can deduce to be correct, right? Where we can assume that these are our starting point truths, and from there on out we can logically deduce certain consequences, such that if we don't violate the principles of logic, we can actually be sure that the consequences that we've deduced are valid as well. And so this as a fundamental mode of thinking can then be applied to categories of economics, but also categories of ethics and of strategy, right? Or jurisprudence as well, right? Which actions ought to be good or bad. Um, and yeah, the Austrian School of Economics is a group of people who have for the last 100 years continued to express the nuances of this deductive way of thinking about human affairs, and have come to quite marvelous conclusions that when you read in a book from someone like Murray Rothbard, one of the greatest praxeologists ever, it's just obviously true when you read it, because it's common sense logic on quite applicable and human matters. So it's delightful to read, and I think it's quite helpful to shape a useful understanding of the world and the human within it.
That's amazing. What so I guess maybe even more fundamentally, um, maybe we could start with what what is money and what is economics? Because you mentioned that, through praxeological method, it's very easy to answer these questions. So I'm eager to hear how those would be sort of defined.
Yeah, so let's start by quoting one of the greatest books in the tradition, Human Action. Right, that's important. That's the name of a title of a book by Ludwig von Mises, probably the first economic treatise, magnum opus that unified an entire school of thought in an entire book. So it's quite rigorous, and it yeah it starts out with the observation that humans act. Right, we have problems. We are in a state of uneasiness, right? We can envision a future that is better than our current situation, right? We have this imagination to come up with a better future scenario for ourselves and our loved ones, right? Um, and then even more crucially, humans can act, right? Humans can allocate their scarce resources to alleviate the problems that they have, and remove that uncertainty from their lives, right? So when we're hungry, right, we can go out and collect some fruits, or hunt some animals and eat, right? We come up with ingenious solutions to very complex problems, and that is what makes humans so special, right? We act. We don't just exist like a rock, right? We cannot just be observed that, okay, if you lift a rock up and you drop it, it's going to fall down to the ground at this certain velocity and acceleration. um, that's study of physics, right? How do inanimate objects behave when they get acted upon by humans, right? Or other objects, but that fundamentally cannot explain the human condition, because humans are not rocks, right? We don't just get acted upon, but in fact we react, and we change our opinions, and we change our modes of action, such that they reflect the situation and the circumstances that we're currently in, and that meaning making capacity and action enforcing capacity is fundamental to understanding the human condition. So yeah, that's where we start.
Amazing. Yeah. So then obviously tying into this idea of economics, right? It's economics is kind of like this conglomerate of a bunch of human action, a bunch of human acting all together in some sort of unison in a way, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. That's another observation, that humans are not isolated creatures, right? We
Mhm.
rarely ever are alone for a prolonged period of time, right? And even, you could argue that one individual itself is not the same thing across time, but different individuals with different experience and different resources at each point in time in the future, right? Like you right now, you're not the same person that you were 10 years ago, obviously, right? You've changed, you've grown, you've improved, and well, that that's a different situation. So humans are very collaborative and social creatures. We work together with others, and they and also other people might value the same things that we value, right? We're quite similar in such things. And that leads to a, let's say, a potential of conflict, because as I said earlier, we have scarce resources. What does that mean, right? That means that when we have a problem and we want to address that, we always need to apply some capital, some resources, in order to solve the problem, right? You need to spend the time to go out in the wilderness and collect the berries, and that's a resource. You can either spend the time picking up berries, or hunting, or fishing, or spending time with your family, or building a hut. And these are all alternative solutions, or ways of action that you could think as possible future scenarios. But the thing is, you can only do any one of them at a time. Right? And if you go out hunting, then that means you will not find any fish, right? And you will not spend time with your family. There's a large opportunity cost for all of the possible scenarios that you did not choose in your ultimate action. And same with physical resources, right? If we have this piece of steak of an animal that we just hunted, well, either you eat it, or I eat it. There is simply no way that both of us can have the same physical good and consume it at the same time. That's not how reality works. So here we have a conflict over how are we going to allocate our resources. Right? Should I eat it now, or should I save it for later? Right? Do you get the steak, or do I get it? And these are all resource allocation decisions that need to be made, and that's extremely difficult, because ultimately, if you consume more than you produce, so to say, you die. Right? You need to ensure that you continue to address your problems, and solve them, and not starve ultimately, um, in order for your organism and existence to continue to manifest. And then the question is, which modes of operandi can we humans choose in order to allocate our scarce resources? Which principle, like which set of rules could we apply? And there are only a couple options, right? For example, like nobody owns the resources, right? Humans just you can only use what your bodily produce, right? So you cannot go out and cut down trees, or mine for metal, or grow some wheat, etc. Nothing in the world is ownable. I mean, that sounds kind of nonsensical, because we would die instantly, right? We need to express ourselves in the real world, and occupy a space in time, and get nourishment, and live life. So therefore, nobody owning anything isn't really an option, right? Um, but everyone owning everything is also not really an option, because what does that mean, right? Like, am I only allowed to eat the steak if everyone agrees that this is mine, and I can consume it? Uh, well, how are we all going to agree, right? We're like a lot of billion people on this planet. Um, so finding a consensus or agreement on who exactly will eat the steak, if everyone has a voice and an opinion to make, is just computational overload, right? We simply cannot manage that either. Um, another proposal would be that some group of people gets to choose how other people get to allocate these resources, right? Or who gets to, one priest class, so to say, gets to say that, yeah, Liev gets one steak, but Max gets the entire cow, for example, which doesn't really sound that fair, because all of a sudden we've created like a different class of people, right? Some who can rule over others, and choose for them how they have to allocate their own resource, right? That's basically slavery. If you can force someone to do a certain type of work without the consent of that person, right? That's simply not all right. It doesn't feel correct. Um, and
Yeah.
it doesn't lead to prosperity in the long run either, which can be explained with economics. But more interestingly, then, is a solution where the person who creates something is the owner of it, and the original homesteading principle. If you build a cabin out in the bush, right, or then, well, you've started something out of what was before just nature. You've created something, and you've therefore it is yours, right? You can choose what to do with it, how to extend the building of it, or who can live in it, and who cannot come into this place. And simultaneously, you can also choose that someone else has this privilege of owning this resource. So you can give it away for free, right? You can gift your resources to others. When you build a cabin in the woods, then you own it, right? You can choose who comes into it and who has to stay out. And importantly, you can also transfer this ownership, this right, to someone else by gifting it to them, right? Just because you would like that other person to have it, or under some other conditions, right? You get to make up the conditions under which you give away the ownership of the house. That could be to sell it for pot of gold, or for a couple cows, or for some promise of future money. All of these things are optional, but the critical thing is that it is consensual, and that
Mm.
there is one person, one individual who actually can make up his mind on, do I want this or not. And then that ultimately is a economic society, right? A place where economics prevails is where there are individuals who own the resources uh, that they use to alleviate their problems, and that they can make the decision on where to allocate the resources and how to allocate them for which problem is up to them, because they own it, and not someone else. And so this is a private property society, or a free society, arguably, because if private property is violated, and that means someone gets stolen from, right, in some shape or form. That might be theft of physical resources, but that of course might be theft of life in the form of murdering someone, or
Sure.
trespassing, of violating some border rules. Of course, rape, right, physical assault in a sexual manner.
Hmm.
All of these aspects of mode of operandi are wrong. They're not the right thing to do, because they violate the rights of to the property of the individual. Right. So as long as an act does not harm the property of someone else, it is therefore a right action to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we could probably throw taxation in there, right? As in a little example too.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what Rothbard. So Rothbard basically defined that there are three modes of interfering with a private free market economy. So there is the autistic intervention, and this basically means that I dictate you that you cannot put these certain substances into your body. Right, you're not allowed to eat meat anymore because, well, the babies are dying, and that's why. And that would be a autistic intervention, right? I prevent you from doing with your own resources what you see fit. Um, the second option would be a binary intervention, where I tell you, hey, give me all your money, basically, and you now have to give me resources so that you no longer own them, but that I own them. And then third is a triangular intervention, where I tell you and your friend that you are not allowed to do that business in between each other. Right? You wanted to give him or sell him the piece of steak, and I tell you, no, that's not allowed. So these are three different ways that humans can act in such a way that it does violate the property of others.
Yeah. To me, like, what really stands out to me about this is it seems like very natural sort of premises and conclusions that are being drawn. Nothing seems to stand out as being absurd or, like when it comes to what you're saying, should be able to go and, go and do commerce with anybody, right? Like I should be able to go to a farm and buy milk, and the Canadian government shouldn't tell me that that's illegal, right? Like my farmer has to worry about selling a product that he very much owns and works very hard at producing. So um, I think that we could definitely benefit, obviously from a more um, top down, way of implementing this stuff. Uh, but of course, um, it becomes very difficult, right? Because for a government to implement these types of principles, because then they got to have their hands out of our pockets, and of course they don't want that. um, that's cool. I
Yeah,
really love.
that is one of the crucial, just foundational criticisms that praxeology leads you to very quickly, right? Is that the state, the government as an organization is one founded on the premise of theft, right? Of taking away from individuals something that the individuals would like to keep. And not signing up for a contract, but being subject to it by birth, right? Where humans are not yet able to actually act and sign contractual obligations for a good reason, right? Because we first need to grow up before we can actually make up our mind on what we want. But ultimately, the government as an institution presides on the fact that it has the monopoly on force and violence to threaten people to behave in a certain way that most likely without this threat of punishment and coercive force, peoples would have acted quite differently. And of course, this is just a very basic and obvious conclusion. And with praxeological rigor, we can deduce out the actual extents of the horror that collectivism or an anti-private property society would lead to.
Yeah, yeah, I can hear sort of this, the government in a way is sort of guiding the actions, of the people, right? By in like having these punishments, if you do this, if you do that. Obviously there are, some fundamental um laws that we're not going to disagree with, like anything that inhibits another human from, acting on their values and in their most purposeful manner, right? Stuff like that. Um, yeah, very interesting stuff. I I think this idea that human beings act on, their highest values, right? Like they act in accordance to their values systems. Um, I find that really fascinating, and I find it very easy to kind of tie this stuff into health as well, right? Because um, needing to act in accordance with your value systems can certainly be a way that we can look at where people are acting in an unhealthy manner in a way, right? Um, Maybe their value systems are skewed in a way that's in accordance with unhealthier actions. So I kind of like that, like this way of exploring human action, and I find it a really good way to study psychology in general. Like I find that especially with psychology, I find it's very, very difficult to study empirically. Uh,
Hmm.
and there's no doubt that the one of the largest scientific crises is is that we cannot reproduce psychological studies. Like upwards of 90% of psychological studies cannot be reproduced, and I find that so interesting, that we're trying to study psychology from this empirical point of view. And all of the best psychological research out there and the best psychological texts were all non-empirical works. Like you think of the people like Jung and Freud and Adler and all these great minds, and um I think this praxeological method is kind of getting at the root of, obviously it's human action, right? And this is kind of guided by our thoughts and our values in a way. So do you have any thoughts on that there?
Yeah, there is really a difference in the methodological approach of how we approach these topics. And interesting is that Jung was quite involved in the Austrian Vienna cafe houses where Mises and Menger and Böhmberg were simultaneously talking about um, uh, the economic affairs. If I remember correctly, the brother of Ludwig von Mises was a student of Jung directly. Um, so
Wow.
there was a big overlap between specifically these two modes of thinking, and they both kind of clashed against other schools of thought, like historicism in the economics case, which eventually ended up at the Frankfurt School of Economics, etc. Um, and as well as the yeah. So both of these are somewhat related, but they do cover different topics. I somewhat like to think of it in a way that the psychology aspect tries to answer the question of why do people act the way that they do. Why,
Mm,
while the economic question is what are the consequences of the action of a given person, and can we make a qualitative judgment or of which like yeah which action might be preferable over another, right? And yeah, so both, I guess the insight of Jung was that there was the individual, right, and the individual subconscious that that is critical, and for Menger and Mises, the insight was that it's not just the not a the economy is not just this collective machine, but it is actually a bunch of small individual actors in who for themselves try to improve their situation and alleviate their problems, and this market emerges, this quite complex system of trade and contracts that then becomes incredibly large, and humans enables humans to solve ever more complex problems.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So, how do we tie, currency into this conversation? Things like fiat currency versus gold versus Bitcoin. How do we bring that into the conversation here?
Yeah, so the question is, what is money, right? What is that thing
Yeah.
even? And almost nobody actually in the classical word really has a grips on how to put it. But again, Austrians and praxeologists have it spot on. Right? Menger defined money as the most saleable medium of exchange. And that's such a prevalent definition, because what's a medium of exchange? That's a good, right? A resource, a scarce asset,
Mm,
which you're not holding because you want to consume it, right? Like some food, and you're not holding it to produce something with it, like a lump of iron or some wood that you could build a house with, right?
sure.
You're holding this asset as a medium of exchange, right? With the intent to trade that asset away for something else in the future, right? So it's not a consumption good, it's not a production good, it's a good which you trade in order to acquire consumption and production goods in the future, right? And that's a medium of exchange, and money is the most liquid medium of exchange, right? So it's the tradable good that basically every entrepreneur wants, right? Every entrepreneur is happy and will provide you whatever good or service that you want, as long as you pay enough of this particular good. And that is the definition of money. It's the thing that everyone is willing to accept in a trade, right? So that means that um, for example, if like you might not know exactly what you want to eat in a week from now, right? Like what you want to eat next Friday evening. When do you want to eat, right? And where do you want to eat? All of these things are kind of uncertain, right? Because well,
Yeah.
anything could happen over the course of the next week, right? So if you would have to book a restaurant and the location and the menu, the food today for in a week from now, you might make a mistake, right? You might book something that you don't like, or at the time that isn't fitting, or even a location where you won't even be at. And so locking in your desire basically for future things is somewhat risky. And the cool thing with money is that you don't actually have to book the restaurant today, right? And make the appointment and do the payment up front and order everything. When you have a bunch of money in your hand, then you can be much more spontaneous, right? Regardless of where you are, regardless when you are, as long as there's someone willing to sell you food, you're going to get it with this money. And therefore, money is a tool to remove the uneasiness of the future. Right? If you have a liquid medium of exchange in your pocket, then you can sleep well at night, because knowing that whatever type of problem you're going to get in the future, you have something that other people will want to trade for, and then that means other people will be able to solve the problems that you have for you.
Wow. So, Is there a problem with fiat currency aside from obviously the infinite printing side of things? Because I guess in essence, you know, if it were scarce, it would be fine, but I guess that's just not what fiat currency is, and that's why we need something like a gold or a Bitcoin, different stuff like that.
Yeah, so the question is what are the consequences for individuals when they utilize a money system with different characteristics, with different attributes? And so you can use many things as money, right? And humans have used many things as money in the past, right? Seashells, tobacco, like glass stones, etc. All of these are times in the past where humans did basically anything if you gave them these goods, and that yeah. The question is though, uh, for example, what happens if like basically what's the cost of producing a new unit of this thing, right? Because if it's very cheap for someone to produce a new unit of the money by himself, right? Then he can just go ahead and spend a little amount of capital of time and effort to produce a large amount of these monetary units, and then he can trade them and get all of the goods and services, right? The actual valuable thing, right? The human attention, the human problem ingenuity solving tasks, right? He gets all of this for a very cheap price of just extracting some raw materials and turning them into into this money system, such that all the people who end up providing, you know, a lot of these services um, will will have the money unit as a representation of the value that they procured, so to say. But all of a sudden the supply of money units in circulation of the economy is much larger than it used to be before, right? Whereas at, you know, at the beginning we have like 100 units of money in circulation, and it was really hard for someone to produce them. So the supply stayed somewhat the same. Then, you know, if you get 10 units of the money, that's like 10% of the money supply, right? That's a substantially big amount payment. But if all of a sudden the new guy comes with 10 million additional units, then like your 10 units of money are proportionally speaking a tiny percentage of the money supply. So
Sure.
what used to be a substantial amount of money turns out to be now really negligible, right? And again, money is a good where where we don't consume it, right? If money were a consumption good, then it would be great if we can produce more money, right? Because we can consume it, right? If humans produce more meat and vegetables, then more humans can eat and not starve anymore. That's great. But if you produce more money, you don't really add any real value to the economy, because money is not something that we like for the consumption or production thereof. And we
Yeah.
use money more as a medium, right? Um, and so a inflow of new quantity of money, right, an increase in the money supply, so to say, sends out ripple effects that lead to a resource misallocation, right? We move capital and resources away from the people who hold and earn this money, and towards the people that can print the money, that produce the money. And so
Mm.
that means if you're early in the process of receiving newly created money, you win, right? Because you can adjust your prices accordingly, and you can then spend the money ahead, and people will do stuff for you. And but you were first in the chain, and the person who later on receives this newly created money after it already passed, you know, many hands. All the other people had the time to adjust their prices upwards to reflect the increase in supply of the monetary asset, but you didn't yet, right? So you still received the old salary of just, you know, zero point 0.5 money units from a couple of years ago, but everyone else already got their salary upgraded to thousands of units, right?
Yeah. There's like no consistency over time. It seems to hurt sort of the little man versus obviously those that are sacking the country.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I
very
mean, it
interesting.
I guess it depends, right? There could be a monetary system that creates new money and gives it to the poorest people of society, right? That is a theoretical possibility, right?
Mhm.
We've usually haven't seen this. Usually, the people who receive newly created money are the politicians or the priest class or large corporations. It's
Yeah.
rarely the little guy, right? And the really nasty thing with inflation is not just that it takes away capital from those who receive the money later and gives it to those who receive the newly created money first. But even more so, it tricks humans into solving the wrong problems, right?
Ah.
Because all of a sudden, the people who received a bunch of new money, well, they think they're rich, right? So they're going to go out and spend it. And uh, the Menger came up with this beautiful insight of diminishing marginal returns, right? So think of it as you're starving on the street, right? And now you get a dollar, so to say, one money, and what are you going to do? Well, most likely you're going to solve your most pressing problem. You're going to get something to drink, right? Because if you don't drink, you're going to starve. So that's the most valuable thing that you're going to do with the first amount of money that you're going to get. Um, so what's the second most valuable thing, right? If you had another dollar to spend, where would you spend it? Maybe it's even more water, and then the third money would be some food, right? And eventually, like if you have 100 money units, you could buy yourself a shower or something like this. Something that's no longer as critical to your survival, but would be nice to have. Um, and so this basically means the richer you are, the more you're going to invest in marginally less valuable things, right? Because obviously you've already invested in the more valuable things before when you had less money. So now that you have more money, you're going to spend on something that you would not have spent the money otherwise. um,
Mm.
and that's especially the case if you're spending someone else's money on someone else's problems, right? Which is the case with today's political class. They steal a lot of money via taxation, and then somehow decide on where this money gets allocated. But officially, of course, it should go back to the people, so to say. But most likely, if you're spending someone else's money on someone else's problem, then you're just going to take a bit of the money for yourself as well, in numerous ways. And
Absolutely.
that means that we build worse projects over time. We start building projects that we probably should not even have started in the first place. And because the person who actually needed to solve a problem uh, are poor because they got taxed, while the person who actually decides on how to spend the money keeps getting richer, and so he's not really going to care on how exactly to apply these resources. So ultimately, inflation just leads to malinvestment and overconsumption.
Amazing. Answered so beautifully, honestly. Like I just I love the approach of, the foundation really of the Austrian point of view, when it comes to economics. Just the way that it's answered is makes so much sense to me. Um, I'm curious, maybe to finish off our conversation on this topic, we could tie sort of this conversation into privacy, because I think this is something that um, we really need to consider moving forward in this technological age. I'm curious about your thoughts on privacy, how we tie that into money, and what sort of the Austrian view is on it. So I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, I guess let's start again with definitions of privacy, and
Yes,
here
sir.
to pull from a somewhat different school of thought, the cypherpunk theory. From the cypherpunk manifesto, privacy is the ability to selectively reveal yourself to the world. And so privacy is a choice, right? A action that humans take, where they choose what to say and to whom they speak. And the words that I'm saying to you now, I can choose what which words I pick. And well, you can be a
Sure.
bit careful with that choice, or just blabber whatever comes to your mind. But ultimately, I could have chosen not to speak to you in the first place, right? Or to not broadcast this conversation to, in the form of a podcast to everyone, right? This is an ability where humans, so to say, allocate the resources of their own body and mind and mouth to ensure that if they don't want to say something, they have the ability not to do so. And if you prefer not the entire world to know, for example, how much money you earn, well, then you can choose simply not to tell it to people, right?
Mhm.
And if you don't reveal information, then it's oftentimes not possible for others to guess it, right? Uh, and the thing is then, though, as soon as you do reveal some information, that other person now having access or knowledge to this information can choose to pass it on, right? So other people can talk about you, so to say, behind your back, right? Without you knowing, gossiping on the information that you've shared with one person in the past. And as a lot of our lives is especially in relation to companies and large institutions, whom by interacting with these companies and services, we are necessarily revealing a lot of information about ourselves to these companies and to a lot of middlemen and service providers to these companies. And well, knowledge is power to some extent. If you do know the deepest secrets of somebody, then this can be used to again put your position like more favorable. Like you can, for example,
Mhm.
manipulate people to do the bidding that you like, right? You could trick them into selling their products cheaper, right? Or trick them into paying you a larger price for something. um, there's a lot of ways that you could subtly try to reallocate resources from other people to you if you know a lot of information about those people. um, and in fact, one of the cheapest ways to defend yourself from an adversary is to be anonymous, right? If the adversary does not know that you even exist, right, let alone what your name is or what exact actions you are doing, but if someone cannot even observe you, then he cannot orient himself in relation to you or decide how to act further on. And so to choose not to share information publicly to anyone and especially to your adversaries is a very effective and very powerful mode of defense. And humans have used different forms of protecting their privacy well, throughout the existence of humankind. And arguably, the stronger our privacy protections have gotten, the more liberated the individual has become. And I think that's to a large extent what we're seeing now in the age not just of the internet, but of Bitcoin and Noster and other yeah uh, cypherpunk technologies that give the individual to the power to actually selectively reveal himself to the world while still being interconnected and active and in collaboration with others.
I'm curious with when it comes to Bitcoin, everything is public, right? You can look at the transactions, you can look at, all the records. Is this at all a threat to privacy? Or I guess, you know, there'd have to be some sort of interaction again to make that known, right? So to have a transaction on the chain, stuff like that. And so I guess again, it's about selectively revealing, I guess, what's going on. But I think you know that might like it kind of just popped in my head as a potential argument against. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, privacy has been the main criticism, or a lack of privacy has been the main criticism to the Bitcoin system basically from day one. And the arguments were this doesn't scale because it isn't private. So maybe let's walk a bit through the history of digital money systems, because humans have been trying to do this since the early 1980s to
Yeah.
create a money in cyberspace, a way to make payments online. And the first variants thereof uh, were based on cryptography that it was known as blind signatures, and it enabled extremely fast and a very private transaction system with the one caveat that there was one server, one computer who defined the rules of this money system. And this server had the ability to create new tokens, and to give them to whoever he wants, right? Um, but that person did not have the ability to trace, how many tokens one user has, or which person he's sending money to. All of these aspects were privately hidden, but the existence of the system depended on that one computer running the software correctly. Um, which sooner or later got shut down, because the ability for a free people to create their own money system is something not allowed by the tyrants of this world. And so for many years there were numerous different attempts to create this money system without relying on a single third party to basically ensure that the timestamping of which transaction was spent first. Right? Because ultimately the problem here is in the digital realm, we are living in a non-scarce environment. Information is not scarce. Information uh, uh, cannot be, information is not exclusive, right? The words that I speak to you now, I still retain them after I give them to you. It's not like when I hand you over a piece of steak that then I can still eat the same piece of steak, right? Uh,
Yeah.
I can send you and 1,000 people a copy of a PDF document, and still my original did not get worse one bit. And this means that we don't need to allocate, or but the problem with money is that specifically it is a scarce asset, right? We use it to trade, and trade only works if both people give up the ownership of the thing, so to say, in favor of the other. Um, and therefore, and another the main problem here is that of double spending, right? If I have a token and I can first send it to Alice, and she gives me a pizza, and then I turn around and send the same token to Bob, and he gives me a piece of steak, and I turn around and send the same token to Charlie. If I keep getting goods, if I keep spending the same coin multiple times, then again, for all intents and purposes, we have inflation, right? Anyone can just spend as much as he wants as long as he has one coin. He can copy them many times, um, and that wouldn't work. So we need a way that Bob knows that the token was already spent to Alice in the past, right? So we need a way to enforce that a token can only be spent once. And
Mhm.
in the old system, this was done via a single central server that kept the time, basically, to say, no, this transaction already happened in the past. It cannot be replayed. Um, and the idea of Bitcoin is that instead of us all trusting this one server, this one computer to do the double spending protection, we simply all do it, right? Everyone tells every transaction that he makes to everyone else, and we have this way of creating a list of all of the transactions, such that we know when a coin was created and when a coin was destroyed, so to say, for the first time. Um, but without the system relying on any single server. So anyone can leave the system at will, and the system continues to operate. It's quite a genius system, but the problem, of course, is that everyone needs to know about every transaction of everyone else in order to ensure that no new money is created ultimately. Um, and and that is quite inefficient, and of course quite privacy violating, because now if you want to make a payment in the Bitcoin system, you need to tell everyone about the transaction that you're making. Meaning you cannot use the Bitcoin system while still not revealing this transaction to the larger world. And so, on a philosophical level, the privacy of Bitcoin is not really there, right? Um, however, there are numerous ways that you can improve the privacy while using Bitcoin. So, in other words, you can make Bitcoin payments while revealing still very little information about you. It might just be a bit more difficult and expensive, but it is possible.
Interesting. Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, it might be a good time to kind of wrap things up here. I'm eager to hear any final thoughts on the episode. Do you want to add anything? Anything you might have missed? Now's the time to kind of
Yeah, praxeology is really a fascinating topic, and I'd encourage anyone to start reading up on a couple books on the topic. It's useful not just for business and stuff like this, but I think it's quite useful for a general any human collaboration. Um, so don't mistaken praxeology to be dry and boring like your economics courses in school. Um, it's it's actually quite fun to read. Especially Murray Rothbard is a very humorous writer and very witty and sharp. So maybe a quick recommendation of a couple books which are
Please.
all available for free as PDFs and audiobooks, usually on Mises.org, which is a great website. Um, so let's start with the big ones first. Human Action by Ludwig von Mises and Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard are the two like definitive books on economics, so to say. If you need to read one book about economics, then do this, and you have covered basically the entire science. So a great collection of ideas. Then maybe if you want to read more about the theory of praxeology itself, then Theory and History by Ludwig von Mises is a great book on the way of thinking about these topics. Um,
Mm.
there is What Has Government Done to Our Money by Murray Rothbard, a great short introduction to the topics of money and how fiat money specifically is quite a devastating affair. um, The Ethics of Money Production by Jörg Guido Hülsmann, also quite excellent on the question of what are the consequences of money printing, and can we, in good heart and conscience, continue doing this? I think the answer is no. Um, we have no, I already mentioned this. Economic Science and the Austrian Method by Hans Hermann Hoppe, where he introduces yet another axiom, not the axiom of action, which Mises introduced, but the axiom of argumentation, which is a additional logical foundation, which, if applied, leads us to deduce a consistent ethics in the praxeological realm. So he has basically solved the problem that you cannot derive an ought from an is. You can, in fact, if you assume that humans act and human argue. So yeah, quite an important achievement. And in the sense of Bitcoin, the best book I think by far is Crypto Economics on the Fundamental Principles of Bitcoin by Eric Voskuil, um, which adds yet another axiom to this mix, which is the axiom of resistance, meaning that security technologies like Bitcoin can only be successfully applied if the victim resists the attacker, so to say. So resistance is required for any system to be secure, and this I think is essential to understand Bitcoin. People keep telling, oh, what if the government bans Bitcoin? Well, the answer to that is we don't care. We simply do it without permission.
Amazing. Amazing. We love to hear that. How can the listener learn more from you? How can they support you? Where do they find you?
Well, I am basically exclusively nowadays posting on free open protocols, specifically podcasts like the one I'm attending here right now. So you search for my name and you'll probably find a couple interesting podcasts. But my most active posting nowadays is on Noster, which is a new set of protocols designed to enable a secure and authenticated and open and censorship resistant way of spreading messages. Basically, a reimagination of the internet, but with good cypherpunk principles at heart. So you can find my public key at max@twowordsliberty.com and find me on any Noster client. Check out, for example, snort.social on the web browser, or Amethyst on Android, or maybe Primal on iOS. There's numerous different applications that allow you access to this new cryptographically signed and authenticated protocol, where nobody can be censored anymore. And we finally have a protocol for free speech on the internet that has a chance of actually working out in the long run, to make all of these walled gardens like X and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all of these obsolete, so that we no longer have to reveal ourselves to a company or corporation in order to create an identity system. And we can, without asking for permission, simply create a private key and use that as the definitive authority on which messages have I signed and agreed upon to. So yeah, Noster is a fascinating protocol worth a look. Check out noster.net with a list of probably well over 100 or 200 client software implementations for using this protocol.
Really cool. Thank you for sharing that, brother. That's amazing. Well, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for all the valuable insight. This has been a great episode. I love this topic so much.
Yes, thanks, Leah, for inviting me to the pod, and keep up the good work. Health is quite important. And yeah, maybe as a closing thought, like um, a a society based on private property is a healthy society. A society
Agreed.
based on theft and deception turns unhealthy very quick. So maybe the most substantial improvement to individual health we can do is to ensure that humans can keep the money that they've earned and not be inflated away under their feet. Because once you are well wealthier and protected and secure, you can actually think much more in the long term, and show a decrease of time preference when you care about your future self, and want to make your body as well, well, the best house possible for the future entities that will inhabit it.
Beautiful. I appreciate that so much. Mr. Hillebrand, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lief. Bye bye.
I want to thank you all for listening. You should all know that this is not medical advice or financial advice, I guess, at this case. It's for informational purposes only. Also, remember, we're all responsible, sovereign beings capable of thinking, criticizing, and understanding absolutely anything. We people in the greater force are together self healers, self governable, self teachers, and so much more. Make sure to reach out with any questions, criticisms, comments, concerns. I love discussing this topic. Eager to hear your thoughts on it. You know where to find me over there on Instagram. It's probably the best way to reach me. Maybe I got to get on one of these decentralized platforms. Really
Oh
up
yeah,
the ante
actually,
here.
speaking of this, check out fountain.fm. It's an interesting way where you can hook up your podcast to your Bitcoin wallet,
Yeah,
and people can send you some Bitcoin while they're listening to the show. Quite
that's
interesting
super cool,
experience.
man. Awesome. I love that. We might have to get that set up. Right on. Appreciate you guys for taking the time to listen to this podcast. If you found it informative in any way, give us a like, share, comment, review, rating. All that would be much appreciated. And just remember, there are two types of people in the world. Those believe they can, those believe they can't, and they are both correct. Thanks for listening. Take care.